I'm Kathy with a C.
And I'm Kathy with a K.
And this is Killer Destinations.
In the 1970s, California had a disproportionately high number of serial killers compared to the rest of the world. And this case is about one of those. But when the cases went cold, the person who exposed the killer hiding in plain sight was the last person you'd expect.
Today's destination is Contra Costa County, California. The county's name means opposite coast and reflects its position on the other side of the bay from San Francisco and is a nod to its Spanish heritage. It was one of the original 27 counties in California. Now we have 58, and was created by the legislature in 1850 at the time of statehood. Early residents include conservationist John Muir, who was instrumental in establishing the United States National Park System, and California's first doctor, John Marsh. Currently, Contra Costa County has more than 1.16 million residents, making it California's 9th most populous county. It was originally to be called Mount Diablo County after the area's most notable landmark. The peak of Mount Diablo is almost 3,900 feet, and on a clear day, it offers views of up to 40 California counties. With diverse landscapes and rolling hills, this county is an ideal place to enjoy the natural beauty of the area. But in the 1970s, the steep ravines and isolated roads also made it an ideal place to hide bodies.
Before we start, I just wanted to mention that the source for a lot of this podcast is from the book A Devil in the Valley, Contra Costa County Sheriff's Department criminalist Paul Holes and Jim Clemente, who is a retired FBI supervisory special agent. And of course, we also used one of our regular sources, newspapers from the time of this case. Back in the 1970s, California was hiding a very big secret. And this secret resulted in the loss of potentially hundreds of lives. California was the epicenter for what has since been dubbed the golden age of serial murder. Now, thanks to the internet, social media, and our much beloved true crime podcasts, a lot of the serial killers from that time are now household names. Names like Joseph D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono Jr., the Hillside Stranglers, the Zodiac Killer, still unidentified, and Richard Ramirez, known as the Night Stalker. And in the mid-1970s, Contra Costa County realized they had an active serial killer, or killers, in their midst. According to an article in the Contra Costa Times in October 1976, over the prior 2 years, 34 murders were reported just in the county's unincorporated areas. And across the county, more than a dozen murders of young women remained unsolved. It all started with a phone call. It was July of 1979, and someone called the Oakland Police Department, which was in neighboring Alameda County, and asked to speak with the person who was in charge of the recent spate of murders of teenage girls and young women. Detective Sergeant Alex Smith took the call, and the person on the other line said, I'm calling for a friend, and they have some information about some murders that happened over the past 7 years, but they're afraid to meet with you and give you the details. So Sergeant Smith was able to convince the caller to have her friend meet him away from the police station. So the following day, Sergeant Smith went into a restaurant 30 miles south of Oakland to meet this woman. And even though he didn't know who she was, as he walked into the restaurant, he immediately zeroed in on one person. There was a woman sitting alone, her head was bent, her eyes were focused on the table, and he could tell her body was shaking. When Sergeant Smith very slowly approached her table, she was momentarily startled, but immediately relaxed when she realized it was the detective. And so this woman was hesitant to trust him at first and was kind of just making small talk, like she wasn't saying what he knew she was there to say, but eventually she was able to tell her story. Kathy, this woman still hadn't given the sergeant her name, but she began to tell her story. She said she knew someone who had killed at least 3 women, probably more, and she hadn't come forward until now because she knew that if this person found out she snitched, she would be killed. So Sergeant Smith said to her, "I'm interested in hearing your story. That's why I'm here." And so the woman started telling him what she knew. After she had finished, Sergeant Smith said to her, "Okay, I need you to meet me at the police station tomorrow so we can sit down in an interview room and you can officially tell me what you're saying and we can put it on a recording." And the woman agreed. So the next day, Sergeant Smith was kind of surprised when the woman actually showed up, and she was led into an interrogation room to meet with him and Alameda County Deputy District Attorney Richard Eigelhart. Kath, the two men had actually spent the prior evening going through cases that the woman had mentioned because they needed to be able to ask her more detailed questions. You know, with the number of murders over the past years and with the number of serial killers that were appearing in California, she wasn't the first person to call and accuse their husband, their boyfriend, their next door neighbor of being a serial killer. So Sergeant Smith told her when they first sat down, "Hey, I need you to give me details that only the killer or somebody associated with the killer would know, because I don't want you to just sit here and repeat things that you read in the newspapers." But Kath, this woman didn't back down. She introduced herself as Sue Perrin and said she was the wife of Phil Hughes, and she answered their questions with details only the killer would know. The first question Sergeant Smith had for Sue Perrin was, "Why, after all this time, are you now telling us what you know about the murders?" Sue responded that her husband Phil was the killer, and he no longer had the same hold over her anymore. She had someone to lean on and finally felt strong enough to go to the police. Then, with her voice occasionally dropping to a mere whisper, Sue told the detective a brutal story of sadism, rape, and murder that began 7 years prior in 1972.
According to Sue, in mid-November 1972, then 24-year-old Phil Hughes came stumbling into the house, and they shared a small house in Moraga, and he was covered with blood. So she is freaked out, and she runs over to him, and he goes, "Something horrible just happened. I was driving home, and I saw a man chasing a young woman across the field, and she was screaming for help. So I immediately pulled over, I got out of the car, and I started chasing the man, but I couldn't catch him, and he escaped. So I went back to see if the woman was okay, and I saw her laying on the ground covered in blood." So Sue is listening, and she's freaking out. And Phil's like, "This woman told me that the guy who ran away had stabbed her over and over and over." And Phil was explaining how this poor girl was thrashing around in total pain. Phil says to Sue, "I offered to take her to the hospital, but she said no. She wouldn't let me take her to the hospital. She told me to put her out of her misery and kill her." And so Sue was like, "What?" And Phil's like, yes. She was in such agony. And I told her the only way I could do that is if I strangle you. And she said, "Please do it." So Phil admits to Sue that he didn't want to do it, but this poor girl who was in total agony didn't want to live anymore. So Phil did what she said and strangled her. And so Sue's like, What? And Phil's like, "Yes, and now I need your help. I don't know what to do. I don't want to leave her body there in the open field. You have to help me dispose of her body."
And Kath, what I read is that Phil apparently had said to Sue, "I need your help to dispose of the body because if I go to the police and tell them what happened, they're not going to believe me. But you know that I didn't do this. You know this is the truth. And as much as I don't want to do this, I don't want to be a suspect in the stabbing."
So this is at about 11 o'clock at night. Phil and Sue drove to the open field and placed this poor woman's body in the trunk of their car along with her clothes and shoes and purse. They then went to a remote location on the eastern side of Mount Diablo and stopped. Phil took the body out of the trunk and tossed it off the side of the road into a deep ravine. Now, as Sue is telling this to Sergeant Smith and to the Deputy DA Eigelhart, she throws in a little factoid. And by the way, I know she was wearing red patent leather shoes because my boyfriend Phil took the time to wipe his fingerprints off them.
Now, Sue Perrin said in the interview that this happened on November 14th, 1972, and only one woman was reported missing that day, 19-year-old Maureen Field. On the day she disappeared, Kath, she was working at a Kmart in Moraga, which was just a few miles from her family home. She was raised in a very large, devoutly Catholic family, 7 kids. The first 5 kids were girls. She was number 4. The last 2 kids were boys. And even though it was a tight-knit family, after she graduated from high school the year before, she wanted to live out on her own. She just needed to probably not be in such a large family. As somebody who didn't grow up, exactly.
She needed space.
She needed not to share a bedroom with siblings. As somebody who never did, I'm just assuming that's the case.
Oh my God. I shared a bed every night with my 2 sisters. I mean, we each had our own beds, but we'd always wind up in one bed.
That's not quite the same thing.
Yeah. Maureen was like, no.
But of course, her parents still wanted to support her. So they let her live on her own, but they were always there for whatever she needed. If she needed to get food, they'd give her food. If she needed her laundry done, she'd have her laundry done. Or if she needed to be picked up from work, they would do that as well.
And honestly, back then at the time, it wasn't unusual for kids to graduate from high school. And if they weren't going off to college, they would just get their own apartment with friends or whatever.
Exactly. So on this mid-November day, Maureen got off work at 5 o'clock and her dad was supposed to pick her up. So she got off at 5 p.m. as usual. She waited for her dad to come pick her up, but her dad was running late. And when he got there, she wasn't standing in her usual spot. So again, Maureen's kind of a free spirit. He wasn't all that worried about her, and he drove home and he told his wife that she wasn't there. And they said, you know what, let's just make some calls, see where she is, make sure she knows you were there in case she's still at the store. So they made some calls. Nobody knew where she was. Nobody had heard from her. But now that she didn't live in the house, sometimes she went off for a couple days without calling them, but she always returned home. So there really wasn't a lot of urgency. Kathy, her family described her as the life of the party wherever she went. She loved to be with her friends and loved the Beatles. Her brother, Joe, was actually interviewed in this book we referenced, and he had said she loved them so much that she actually had a note that she attached to their mailbox, and it was on the outside of the mailbox, and it said, "Any mail for George, Paul, John, or Ringo, deliver here."
That's awesome.
I'm not sure if she thought it would work, but why not?
That's clever.
But then, with just one phone call, their lives were shattered. 2 days after Maureen was last seen, the home phone rang around 5 p.m. Mr. Field answered the phone and he heard a male voice say, "I just want to let you know that I killed your daughter." And that was all the caller said before hanging up. Now, again, in this book, Maureen's younger brother Joe said that he actually still remembers the day that his father answered that call. He said because they were all waiting for word from Maureen, they were all kind of standing around when the phone rang. And Joe said his father's face went just stark white and he dropped the phone. And then he looked at his wife and kids and told them what the man had said. Now, the worst part of the call, of course, was not knowing if it was real or if it was just a horrifying prank. And while they called the police to report the call, there wasn't much that the police could do. So the Field family tried to figure out who Maureen might have gone off with or where she might be. And the hope, of course, was that everything would be okay and she would just walk through the front door like normal. Thanksgiving 1972 was just 9 days after Maureen disappeared, so her hopeful family set a place for her at the Thanksgiving table. They also bought and wrapped gifts for her and put them under the tree at Christmas. But as the new year dawned without any word from Maureen, the family, of course, knew the longer she was gone without any word, the less likely it was that she would be coming back at all. Then, 3 months later, on the day after Valentine's Day, 1973, the Field family got the phone call they'd been fearing. Maureen's decomposing body was found off Morgan Territory Road by Mount Diablo. She'd been strangled and stabbed 47 times, and her clothes were found hanging in a tree nearby. This location was exactly where Sue Perrin said Phil Hughes tossed the woman's body into the ravine. And until now, 7 years after Maureen Field was murdered, the case had been cold.
Sue told Sergeant Smith that just 14 months later, there was another murder. And by this point, Sue and Phil were now married. And in January of 1974, they were going to spend the weekend house sitting for one of Sue's co-workers. So while Phil made money doing odd jobs and burglarizing empty homes,
as one does,
Sue was a teller at a bank in San Francisco.
And Kathy, in this book, A Devil in the Valley, it says that in the case files, the authors came across Sue Perrin's original job application to the bank. And as was apparently typical in the 1970s, which I don't know that that's true, but
I have no idea.
Okay. The application listed her weight, height, and hair color.
Oh my God.
The only thing missing were her measurements.
Yeah, no kidding. Can you imagine?
No.
I'm sure that a bank is like, we're very fancy and we would like our tellers to be very attractive. This is a total side note, but I used to work with the case manager at my job doing homelessness, and she used to work in Vegas. She was one of those people who delivered drinks poolside. Okay. So I'm like, oh my God, what a great job. You must have made so much money. And she kind of looks at me and she goes, yeah, I did make a lot of money. She goes, I was in a bathing suit. I was like, what? And she goes, yeah. She goes, this was my job interview. Put on a bathing suit, walk 10 steps that way and 10 steps back.
That's not surprising.
Isn't that like...
I mean, that's what you're getting paid for.
Yeah, I know. I couldn't handle that.
Brings all the boys to the yard.
Okay, anyway, so on this Friday after work, Sue and Phil drove to her coworker's house in the Montclair neighborhood of Berkeley, just over the county line from Contra Costa. Sue told Sergeant Smith that the next morning, January 26, 1974, at around 11:15, they were driving through Montclair and saw a young girl dressed in blue jeans and a blue blouse walking down the street. Sue was driving a 1970 green Fiat and Phil was the front seat passenger when they passed the teenager and they pulled over. When they stopped and offered her a ride, the girl said her name was Lisa and she was just going down the hill to the grocery store. He pulled out a knife and threatened to use it on her if she didn't get down on the floorboards so no one could see her. Sue drove back to her coworker's house, and when she unlocked the door, Phil brought the young girl out of the car at knife point. And once inside the house, he told Sue to keep the dogs upstairs, and then he took Lisa down into the basement. So as she's telling the story, Sue said she didn't know what Phil was going to do, but now she knew he had something in him that was driving him to kill. She said he told her it was something he needed, something he craved.
So, Kathy, what I heard in this book...
You heard?
It was audio.
Oh, okay.
Book on tape. But what I heard is that when Phil was born, his umbilical cord was wrapped around his neck. And while it didn't cause any, like he wasn't blue when he was born, there was, no resuscitation efforts, there was still that moment of, oh my gosh, something's happening to him, right? At some point, he had not had the oxygen he may have needed. And so as he was growing up, especially as a little baby, he did not want to be touched. Like,
that is weird.
As an infant, like, don't touch me. He would be picked up. He would cry. And the mother was just so upset that she couldn't comfort this little baby she'd adopted. As he grew up, you get into elementary school, he starts killing small animals. He starts torturing small animals. Mm-hmm. He actually had a younger brother who was several years younger, who was actually friends with Maureen Field's younger brother.
First victim.
The first victim. And Maureen's brother and Phil's brother became friends because both of them had broken arms at the same time. Like, they'd gone to the same school. They kind of knew who each other was. Phil actually just grew up down the street from victim number one.
Oh, wow.
But the two brothers went to school one day and they were like, hey, look, we both have casts. And they just kind of bonded after that. It turned out, though, that it was actually Phil who broke his little brother's arm in a fit of rage. And then the other reason that there was this need and craving to kill was apparently Phil had a girlfriend when he was in high school. And he told his now wife, Sue, that he had always wanted to kill her. But he knew if he killed her, he would be the obvious suspect. And so he started finding other people to kill instead.
So he wanted to kill her while they were dating or after they broke up? Do you remember that?
It was after they broke up, but the reason they broke up is the parents did not like Phil, and so they sent her down to Arizona for college. And that
Interesting.
And that was the breakup. But apparently he went down there a couple of times, but
Phil was probably I'm sure the parents had good instincts.
Part of those instincts, though, Kath, is that I believe he was 18 when they started dating, and the girlfriend was 15. Her name, by the way, was Kathy. I believe she spelled it like you, though.
I think she was a K.
I'm pretty sure it's a C.
She was a K.
Nope, C. But they started dating, and one night the daughter didn't come home. And so they called the police, and the police said, there's nothing we can do. It's 1970s. Kids are hitchhiking and running away from home all the time.
Like, she's 15. Yeah. She's out with a boyfriend. She'll come home soon.
Let us know when she comes home.
Right.
And she did. A couple days later, she came home. But the parents were pissed because she said she'd been with Phil that entire time. And when she came home, Kath, she had marks on her neck, and she wouldn't tell her parents where they came from.
Oh, no wonder they sent her to college in Arizona. Okay, so in the book, I know the kind of like trifecta for,
serial killers.
Yeah, is like bedwetting, fire starting, and hurting animals.
I don't know that he had the other two, just the animals. He very well may have, but it wasn't mentioned in the book.
Am I right? Is bedwetting the third?
Oh, yeah, it is.
Okay. All right. So they just...
And despite that, you're fine.
And I turned out okay.
And your sister slept in the same bed with you, which is weird.
We would totally sleep in the same bed and sing ourselves songs at night. Anyway,
like
whatever.
Self-soothing?
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? Oh my God. But I never broke her arm. All right, so going back to the coworker's house where this young girl, Lisa, Sue told detectives that while Phil was downstairs with Lisa, the homeowners came home early. So Sue freaked out, she panicked, and she ran out the front door to get her coworker before she came into the house. And she said, look, Phil and I were in the middle of a huge argument. I'm really, really sorry. But is it possible that you guys can just let us finish it? Can you just come back a few hours later while we work things out? And so the coworker's like, sure, no problem.
Isn't that weird, though, where you're like, we're fighting.
Yeah.
We're not going to leave to keep fighting.
Yeah.
We're going to do it in your house.
We would really like to continue fighting in your house. That'd be a very bizarre thing to tell somebody.
I agree.
But I could see myself being like, oh, okay, I'll see you in a few hours.
But it's not even a friend. It's a coworker.
I know. That's why it's so weird.
Yeah.
But
it
anyway.
was early 70s. What do you want?
Yeah. So anyway, the coworker left and returned a few hours later. And after the coworker took off, Phil came upstairs. He was nude and covered in blood and told Sue to come downstairs to the basement to help him clean up. When she walked down there, she saw Lisa lying on her back, naked and covered in blood. She could see stab wounds in Lisa's chest and thought her throat had been slashed. And Phil and Sue together took Lisa's body to the shower and washed it off, and then Phil washed himself off. They wrapped Lisa's body in a sleeping bag and put it in the trunk of the car. Then they spent the next couple hours cleaning up the basement. And at that point, Sue called her coworker to let her know they were leaving her home.
Honestly, it's such a horrific scene that Sue walks downstairs and she's like, oh, okay, well, let's clean her up.
But I mean,
how do you see this girl who'd been full of energy getting into your car and a couple hours later, she's got no life in her?
Right. And you're helping your screwed up husband. You're facilitating the crime.
Right.
And then you're helping him hide it. So, like, did the book get into anything about Sue's psyche? I mean, what the hell?
Well, it turned out that she, as you can imagine, was an abused wife and had been a girlfriend as well. And it didn't sound like it was any physical beatings. Obviously, not that that's the only way to do it, but it was psychological. It was mental.
It was probably sexual, too.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. It was mental and it was sexual. And one of the things that came out later, Sue had told the detective and the deputy DA at this point that when she had talked about Phil's need and craving to kill people, he would have Sue dress up as a murder victim. So Sue said that her husband would take pictures of her in these different scenes of death. Sometimes she was standing on a bed with a noose around her neck, so it looked like she was hanging. Sometimes she looked like she'd been stabbed or shot, sexually assaulted. All of these things, they used ketchup in lieu of blood, so the pictures would look real. And in every photo, if she had any clothes on at all, it was always different. So it always looked like it happened at a different time to a different person.
That is so crazy. So she is basically his living fantasy. It's a miracle he didn't kill her.
Well, she said that several times he threatened to do it. And at one point, he had a gun and was starting to choke her. And she's like, if you're going to kill me now. Don't put me through the pain. And he was like, nope, you get the pain. And so he choked her many times, usually during sex, until she passed out.
Oh my God. And it's so funny, like you and I do this all the time. When we come across a situation like this that's so pathologically anomalous, we're always looking for an excuse. Like, what's the reason? Not an excuse, but like an explanation.
There has to be some sort of rationale.
Yeah, because it's like people just don't behave like this. But I mean, some people actually just do, you know? And it's like, I'm so curious, like, what was Sue's upbringing like that she became so susceptible to an abusive man?
Well, one of the things Sue had told detectives is that he was an incredibly manipulative man, which of course we know just from the first murder.
Sure.
And honestly, I don't even know, and I don't remember if it was said in the book or written in the book, if that helps you, whether or not she actually believed him when he said he killed this woman because she begged him to.
Like a mercy killing.
Right, exactly. And then that's when he came home and needed her help hiding it. And I know that I'm more cynical than some people, but if somebody came to me and said, no, she begged me to kill her, I'd be like, okay, you wait right here. I'm going to get my car keys. I swear I'm not running away and going to the police.
Right.
But just stay here.
Just close your eyes,
Exactly.
count to 10.
Let's play a little
I
game.
have a surprise for you in my car. I'll be right back.
Exactly.
Okay, so back to Sue, Phil, and Lisa's body. Once they left her coworker's house, they drove back to their own house in Contra Costa County and parked in the driveway. According to police files, Lisa's body was left inside the trunk of Sue's Fiat for several days because they didn't know what to do with her. Phil finally decided what they were going to do, and late one night they drove the car out into the hills in Moraga where they lived. Once they were on a desolate road, Sue pulled the car over and Phil got out and removed Lisa's body from the trunk. So Phil told Sue to drive away so that no one saw the car idling on the side of the road, and he told her to come back in about a half an hour. But just before she left, Phil took a shovel out of the trunk, and so by the time she returned, Sue knew that Phil had finished burying Lisa's body down in the ravine.
So, Kathy, this young teenager turned out to be 15-year-old Lisa Ann Beery. She was from Montclair, a neighborhood within the city of Oakland, and this area in the 70s was considered to be a wonderful, wealthy place to live. It was family-friendly, it had great schools, and it had a strong sense of community. On that Saturday morning, Lisa and her family, which included her mom, her dad, her younger sister, and a brother, were getting ready to go sailing in the San Francisco Bay. Apparently, her father had made his money by dabbling in yacht sales and real estate. Their dad had already gone down to the marina to get the boat ready, but before Lisa went down with her mother and sister, Lisa really wanted to go down to the grocery store, which was like 1 to 2 miles away from the house, because she wanted to cash a $10 babysitting check she had. And her mom was like, okay, you can go down to the grocery store, but hurry up because we don't want to be late to get out on the boat. So Lisa grabbed her jacket and hurried down the street toward the store. And it was then that Lisa had the misfortune of coming across Phil and Sue. In the book we referenced, her younger sister Connie said she remembered Lisa walking down the street, and she said she was like almost skipping because she was going to get her money, and she was super proud of herself because she had earned that cash. But after waiting for 90 minutes without Lisa returning, Mrs. Beery was in a panic because Lisa never disobeyed her parents. Little did they know that Lisa had accepted a ride so that she could get home quickly. Now, Kath, at some points in the book, it kind of alluded to the fact that Lisa had been hitchhiking, but it was never obviously stated with any certainty because they were never able to get definitive proof. Now, Lisa was smart, she got great grades, and she was very musically inclined. She could sing, she was a self-taught pianist, and she also wrote music and lyrics. Her sister described her as that friend who would never hesitate to step up when somebody needed anything. So Mrs. Beery and Connie got in the car and drove down the hill toward the grocery store. They looked all along the streets as they drove by and tried to peek into shop windows as they passed, hoping Lisa had just become distracted and lost track of time. But when they got to the grocery store, no one remembered seeing her. It was so out of the ordinary that it was an immediate red flag for the family. Something had happened to their little girl. Mr. Beery met the family back at the house, and Lisa's parents called everyone they could think of to ask if they'd seen Lisa or if they'd heard anything from her, but no one had. And of course, their fear spiked even more when the sun went down and it became dark. She was now out there somewhere, all alone. And that's when they called the police. As you'd expect in the 1970s, police didn't take the call as seriously as they would. I mean, we've talked about it with, unfortunately, the other victims as well. Kids in the day ran away or hitched a ride.
Or were presumed to have run away.
Exactly. And there wasn't an Amber Alert. There wasn't anything that had them immediately looking. But Lisa's parents were adamant to the police that there was no reason for their daughter to run away. And so the police actually acquiesced and had patrol officers on the street looking for her, as well as questioning people who might have seen something. Now, by the next morning, all of their friends and neighbors knew that something had gone terribly wrong. They knew that there were search teams in the mountains. The police cars had been at the Beery house that whole night. And then Mr. Field took charge and said, "It is our mission to find Lisa, and I will bring her home." Unfortunately, Kathy, after a few months, Lisa was ultimately declared missing, and the case soon went cold. And during the years that passed, her body was never found. However, after speaking with Sue Perrin, the police were able to send out a search patrol to the general area that Sue talked about pulling over, and they eventually found Lisa's remains wrapped in a sleeping bag in a shallow grave.
Sue told detectives that Phil's third victim was 25-year-old Letitia Fagot, who was one of Sue's co-workers. As we said, Phil kept telling Sue that he had a need to kill. And as we talked about, it was traced back to his first girlfriend. And sometimes when the urge was just overwhelming, he wanted to kill someone who was close to Kathy's build and looks. Sue admitted that she had given her husband the names of 4 female coworkers who could be possible victims for murder, including Letitia Fagot. And Sue was actually friends with Letitia, but she gave Phil her name because she told police that she really didn't think Phil would be interested in Letitia. Phil said that Kathy, his original girlfriend, was short with dark hair and a curvy body. Letitia was the exact opposite, and she looked a lot like Sue.
And remember from the job application, Sue was 5'9", 125 pounds and blonde.
Well, it's funny because we talked about the job application, but we didn't give Sue's measurements. Yeah.
Her stats.
Yes, exactly. So then one day in March 1975, more than a year after Lisa Beery was murdered, Sue happened to mention that Letitia's husband was going to be away on business. Honestly, Kathy, at this point, I'd like to bitch slap Sue.
Yeah.
But anyway, Phil then asked his wife, Sue, how long Letitia's husband was going to be away. On Wednesday, March 19th, 1975, Letitia Fagot did not show up for work, and Sue Perrin was afraid she knew what had happened. Francis and Letitia Fagot got married in early September of 1973, so that's just a year and a half before she failed to show up for work. They moved into an old Victorian in the heart of San Francisco and worked on fixing it up. Then one night, Francis went out to his car after dinner to get something for work when a man came up behind him and pulled out a knife and put it to his throat. Of course, he forced Francis to give up his money, and then the man ran away. But that freaked them out. Neither Letitia nor Francis wanted to ever experience something like that again, so they decided to leave the mean streets of San Francisco. So they moved 25 miles east to the city of Walnut Creek, a quiet, idyllic town with a fixer-upper that they were going to repair over time. They were excited because this was a great community and one day raise a family. So when Letitia didn't show up for work, her coworkers were surprised because she never ran late. She was always on time. So by mid-morning, when she hadn't called, they actually called police and asked for a welfare check on their friend. Part of the reason, Kat, they did this is because they knew that her husband was out of town. So Walnut Creek police show up at her house, and after not getting any response to the knocks on the door, they went inside. In the master bedroom, they found Letitia naked and lying on her back. She'd been hit on the top of the head with a blunt object, then strangled with a cord. It also appeared that she had been raped. So Walnut Creek police were like, what the heck? This doesn't happen in our community. And they canvassed the neighborhoods. They fanned out to find witnesses. And smartly, they came across a local newspaper boy. He delivered papers every morning to the Fagot home. And the only thing he remembered that was out of place was Francis Fagot's car in the driveway. The paper boy, who had been delivering papers at 6:30 that morning, specifically remembered the vehicle because it was parked differently. It was pulled into the driveway at an angle, and it was partially blocking the sidewalk. And so the paper boy specifically remembered, I had to steer my bike around the vehicle and into the street so I didn't run into it. And so it stood out. Well, the police were like, well, wait a second, this is weird. Francis is supposed to be away. He's supposed to be in Monterey, which is almost a 3-hour drive from Walnut Creek. What the heck? He came back, he murdered his wife, and then he took off in this car. What's going on? So police call him home and they say, there's been a medical emergency and we need you to come home, sir. So Francis gets home and the coroner had already removed the body. All he was told was that Letitia had been found dead in their bedroom, and it didn't appear to be from natural causes. Now, because he's the primary suspect, they don't want to give up all the facts of her murder. They're hoping he is going to give them something. And they really did pound him for a grieving husband with questions and where were you and what vehicle were you in and did you come home and blah, 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 blah.
Why did somebody see your car here if
Right.
you weren't here?
They had to reconcile that. Well, he was just adamant. It wasn't me. I wasn't there. He was a completely and totally distraught husband. He'd only been married a year and a half. Anyway, so police then go and they interview his coworkers and the people who were at this event in Monterey. And they all said, no, absolutely not. 100%. He was there. He never left. There's no way he was home. So just like Maureen Field and Lisa Beery, Letitia Fago's case went cold until Sue Perrin made the decision to talk to the police.
And Kathy, one of the things that was said is the day before Letitia was killed, she and Francis had met for lunch in San Francisco because he had to drive down to Monterey and wouldn't see her that night, and they had a nice lunch together. And it was at that lunch that Letitia told him that she thought she was pregnant. It wasn't official yet, but she thought she was. She'd missed her period, and they were both just ecstatic. So, of course, when Francis found out that Letitia had been killed, his first thought was, oh my gosh, did I also lose my baby? And he went to the coroner and said, can you tell me, was my wife pregnant? And the doctor said they actually had checked for that as part of their autopsy, and Letitia was not pregnant when she was killed.
How horrible. That poor man.
Sergeant Smith wrapped up his last interview with Sue Perrin, and Kathy, there were anywhere from like 3 to 8 interviews. I know there were more than 3. I'm not quite sure how many there were, but he was pulling her back into the station again and again and again. So after he finished his last interview with Sue Perrin, it was around 10 o'clock at night, and Sergeant Smith said, okay, you go home, but under no circumstance do you tell Phil that you've talked to the police. Now, of course, we know that she was afraid of Phil, and that's why she had kind of played that squirrely game in the middle. But I think even though Sergeant Smith knew that Sue was afraid, he didn't want Sue to kind of break down and be like, I don't want you to get in trouble. I have to tell you what I've been doing.
Totally, because she's obviously a weak person. I mean, honestly, you know what I mean?
No, I agree.
Like, she's under his thumb.
Right. She was weak and she was under his thumb, but if you'll recall at the beginning when she first met with Sergeant Smith, she said to him the reason she was coming forward now after at least 7 years was because she had someone in her life who made her strong. Apparently, in 1978, so the year before she went to the police, Phil had told her, we now have an open marriage.
I could totally see Phil like, bow chicka bow wow, in the 1970s wanting to be a swinger.
Exactly, and so that's what he did, and he brought in a girlfriend named Holly. Sue was like, what's good for the gander is good for a goose.
Oh, that's so funny. You're turning it around. Okay, got it. Okay, got it. Go ahead.
And she's like, I'm going to date too. And he was like, no, that's not how it works. I can date, you cannot.
He's like, infidelity and murder is a one-way street, sweetheart.
Exactly. Leave it to the men to do it.
Exactly.
But she started dating somebody, and it turned out it was a police officer. And they'd only dated for a couple months when Sue said they were watching TV together, they were at his house, and all of a sudden, all of this stuff that had been going on just came vomiting out of her. I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
And she told him all of this. And his response was, you have to go and tell the police right now.
I wonder if she told him every single little detail that she was sharing with the detective sergeant. You know what I mean?
Right. I don't know.
Or if she was like, oh, I think my husband, I'm suspicious this, suspicious that. You know what I mean?
I aided and abetted in the murders of these women.
Right. You're dating a woman who has
the capacity to kill.
For sure.
Or at least help.
Hide. Yeah, for sure.
Well, help. She freaking
she was
sold out a friend.
She was a facilitator.
Anyway, so this is why she had gotten strong. And I think that had to have been what helped her go through with this the whole time, right? Not only did she have somebody backing her, giving her an out from Phil, but also how does she go back on it now?
Right.
So the next morning, which was just 12 days after Sue first reached out to police, detectives were waiting when Phil got out of his car just before 8 a.m. when he arrived at his job as a janitor. Philip Joseph Hughes was arrested for the murders of Maureen Smith, Lisa Ann Beery, and Letitia Fago. Now, here's what's interesting. When he was put into the backseat of the patrol car, all handcuffed up, he was shocked to see that Sue was there and handcuffed as well. Here's what happened. Sergeant Smith had said to Sue the day before, here's what we want you to do. We want you to pretend that we've arrested you, so you're going to sit in the back of the car handcuffed when Phil comes in, and we want to see if he's going to tell you anything that he doesn't want us to hear. Is he going to plot something with you? Is he going to implicate himself in something? So you just sit there and let him talk. Well, it turned out that Phil did. And even though he said it in hushed tones, however many microphones they had in the car picked up this conversation. And basically what Phil said to Sue was, you keep your trap shut. I'm going to plead insane. I'm going to just start acting crazy and say that I was out of my mind, which actually I think was probably pretty close to the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
But he's like, I'm going to act crazy and that way we'll both be able to get out of it. The reason she agreed to this, Kathy, is in all of these interviews with police, Sue had never asked for or gotten a deal of reduced prosecution or immunity. And so in her mind, she said the reason that she did this is she was hoping they'd say, oh, she helped us, so let's be lenient with her. And that actually worked. Once Phil was officially charged, detectives were finally able to call the Field, Beery, and Fagot families to let them know that they'd finally arrested the killer. And Kathy and Lisa Ann Beery's case, they were able to tell the family they'd been able to locate her remains.
I can't imagine being a family member, a parent, getting that call. And just, of course, there's no happiness, there's no joy. There is gratitude. And I don't know if the right word would be relief, but
you want to know where they are.
Yeah.
You want to be able to bury them.
And you also want your measure of vengeance.
Yeah.
Like you want that killer to be punished and caught and not doing this to anybody else. I just can't imagine being on the receiving end of a phone call like that.
Now, Kathy, the interesting thing too is that Sue's conversation with detectives also uncovered another piece to the puzzle. With Sue's information, police were able to figure out how Francis Fagot's car was in the driveway when he was supposed to have been 3 hours away. It turned out that Phil had asked Sue what kind of car Letitia's husband drove, and she told him. So Phil went to a rental car company and rented the same make, model, and color of car. And he did this for two reasons. One, he didn't want any of the neighbors to see a strange car in the driveway because, especially back in the 70s, everybody knew who everyone was and they would have called the police. Secondly, he hoped that somebody would see it and be able to say that Francis was home at the time Letitia was killed, and therefore he would be their only suspect.
That is pretty,
diabolical?
Yes.
Pathological?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Multiple forensic psychiatrists evaluated Phil's mental state leading up to the trial, and at the competency hearing, the judge ruled that he was able to stand trial for the 3 homicides, even though he tried to pretend he was insane. Sue Perrin was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony, and Kath, I understand that the families were very critical about this. Why is this woman who was clearly participating and knowledgeable and all that kind of stuff? No, she didn't do the actual killing, but she was a facilitator and she knew what was happening. Why is she getting immunity?
Right. And also, I'm sure Letitia Fagot's husband was like, you handed her on a platter to your husband.
Right. Oh my God. Right.
But detectives said that they made the decision because without her coming to the police, they never would have known what happened to the women, who the killer was, and where Lisa Beery's body was found. But also without her testimony, they actually had no evidence linking him to the crimes.
In 1980, 31-year-old Philip Hughes was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. Now, for each count, the judge sentenced him to a term of 7 years in prison to life, with the possibility of parole. And Kath, the judge allowed these 3 terms to run concurrently, so at the same time. They didn't stack. They weren't consecutive.
I get so mad when I see that happen, even now. At any time, there's no reason to make it concurrent.
No, I agree. But maybe that's the vindictive side of my nature speaking.
That's okay. That's part of what I like about you. Just one of the many things. So the question is, how in the HE double hockey sticks, after all this gruesomeness, we're not swearing.
Okay, Punky Brewster.
But how did this happen? Why 7 years to life with parole concurrently? So the reason for this egregious sentence can be traced back to the California Supreme Court in the early 1970s. In February of 1972, the court found that the death penalty was cruel and unusual punishment, but one of the impacts of this decision was not just getting rid of the death penalty, it also allowed all death row inmates to now have their death sentences revoked and converted into life sentences with the possibility of parole. Getting rid of the death penalty also got rid of LWOP, my favorite abbreviation, was no longer a potential sentence. I even remember wondering this. How on earth did Charles Manson go from being on death row to being eligible for parole? And this was why. This man who committed such horrendous atrocities, much like Philip Hughes, I'm talking about Charles Manson, he had hearings in front of the parole board at least 12 times before he died in prison in 2017. Now, I don't think anybody ever expected him to get out, even though he had parole hearings, but the fact is he could have.
Right.
You just never know.
It's such an imposition on the victims' families.
Well, it is. Now, really quickly, LWOP was added back to the California statutes 3 years later when California voters actually approved an item on the ballot that said, we want LWOP. That's all it said. We want LWOP. And so, because Philip Hughes murdered the 3 women during this period of time from 1972 to 1975, when the California Supremes went a little cray-cray, this was actually the harshest sentence the judge was allowed to give.
Oh, the 7 years to life.
The 7 years to life. Philip Hughes had his first parole hearing in 1985, just 4 years after he was convicted. But family members of the Field, Beery, and Fagot clans were there and out in force. When Phil Hughes heard that the families were going to be there, he said, no, I'll just have my attorney go. I'm good. I don't need to be there. Coward.
Yep.
But the families talked about the fact that they basically get ripped to shreds again when they go to these, right?
For sure.
They read through the court transcripts. They have to hear every horrible thing that happened to their family members and loved ones. And then they have to testify about how it impacted their families, all the horrible things they went through. So he was denied parole in 1985, but was eligible to apply again in 3 years. And Kath, he came up after his initial 85 hearing, 1988, 1991, 1993, 1998, 2001, and 2006. And the families came back time and time again, talking about their loved ones and making sure he didn't get parole, which he did not.
Interestingly, though, in 2006, Phil Hughes began voluntarily waiving his right to parole hearings. 9 years later, in 2015, he stipulated that he was not suitable for parole, agreeing not to request a new parole hearing until 2025. And according to the California Parole Board, Philip Joseph Hughes was listed as having had a parole hearing on December 9th, so just a couple weeks ago. Now, no decision has been made, but if he is given parole, we will bring you an update. Now 77 years old, Philip Hughes is serving time at the California Correctional Institution in Tehachapi in Central California. All right, thanks for listening. The end.